Okay, let me run through the other punctuation marks that are addressed in the punctuation section of the Associated Press style book. I'll go ahead and talk about apostrophes. And okay, apostrophes basically have two jobs. One, they show possession. This is a complex thing, and it interacts a lot with plurals. So I'm going to make that a separate video that I'm going to cover later. I'm going to come back to that in one big session because it is a little bit complicated. The second thing that apostrophes show is when you're omitting letters from a word. So that's what I'll focus on here. Of course, the most common use of that is in what we call contractions. So instead of saying do not, we might say don't. Okay, we've squished those two words together and omitted something, and that's what the apostrophe is for. You will see this sometimes in years, or decades. So you might say America celebrated its bicentennial in 1976. You could also say they did it in 76. I wouldn't get carried away with doing that kind of stuff in news copy, but that would be correct. One thing though too, the quotes in most word processing, the apostrophes I should say, in most word processing programs will angle one direction or another. These are called smart quotes or smart apostrophes. They need to angle, they need to curve toward the thing that they're omitting, the thing that they're replacing. So this one is actually backwards because the program that I'm using is assuming that I want to curve it toward the letter because that's how you would do most things. You'd put something inside quotation marks. It's thinking this is a single quotation mark. Instead, let's do this. You can actually trick it into thinking that it goes somewhere else. So you go ahead and type the letters, put it like that, and then backspace over it, and now it curves the right direction. Okay, so that's and every time you copy and paste that in a different program, that'll probably go away, and you have to keep doing it. That is technically how it should be written, though. That should angle toward what's being omitted. Okay, same idea as years and decades. So the decade is the 1980s. Notice that there is no apostrophe here because this is not omitting anything and it's not possessive. It's just making it plural, so we don't use an apostrophe. And you'll see people do that a lot. I think other style books actually call for it, but AP says no apostrophe there, and I think they're absolutely correct on this to do it that way. But you could also write that the 80s. And again, if I want to do my angling trick, okay, if you wanted to say I enjoyed the 80s, right? This is how you would write it. And again, see how weird this would look if you put that there? I mean, that's just as weird as all get out. Okay, let's talk about uses of colons. Shouldn't you really be using a ton of colons in your news writing? Sometimes they have certain purposes in headlines and other things, but as far as within sentences in the body of a story, they really only have one job. Okay, a colon's job is to introduce a list or an idea, sometimes for emphasis. Okay, so in this example, we are introducing an idea. Now the president faces a difficult decision. What is that difficult decision? We're introducing it with a colon. Should he try to cut a deal or just veto the bill? Notice that in this case, what follows the colon is a complete sentence that could stand on its own as a complete sentence. In that case, this letter right here needs to be capitalized. Okay, not lowercase, but it needs to be capitalized. Alternatively, let's say we had a different sentence. Let's say the sentence was this. Okay, here we have just a list of one thing. We're just trying to, for maybe dramatic effect, stating one thing. The rare beetle has only one natural predator, the boot. In other words, you can step on it and kill it. That's the only thing that kills it. Get it? It's kind of a joke. I think I read this sentence in National Geographic years ago. Whatever. In this case, it's a list of one thing. This is not a complete sentence. Obviously, there's no verb in it or anything like that. So we don't capitalize this letter. Okay, that just stays lowercase. Sometimes these will be more of a conventional list. Let's see if I can find another example here. General Motors eliminated several of its brands: Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Saturn, Geo, and Hummer. Okay, so you have here a complete thought, complete sentence. You're introducing a list, and the key thing here is that we're using a colon because we don't have any other kind of verb that shows that a list is coming up. So where people make a mistake is they might say General Motors eliminated several of its brands, including, and they might, I guess they would probably write it here, and they would put a colon and then have the list. You don't use that colon if you've got a word like this that's introducing the list. Okay, this only is done when the first part of this would stand alone as a sentence and there's no other word linking the list to that sentence at the beginning. So in this case, we would get rid of that. I would say for the sake of organization, maybe I would put a comma right there. But anyway, that's how you would not use a colon in that situation. Okay, move on to a different punctuation mark here. Let's talk about dashes versus hyphens. These are not the same thing. They serve two completely different purposes, and they are different punctuation marks, but people confuse them. So let's say a hyphen is like this. You just type the key, which is next to the 0 on the top row of your keyboard once. Okay, that's a hyphen. Dashes are a little more complicated. Depending on what computer you're using, they might be typed differently. In Microsoft Word on a PC, normally what happens is if you type hyphen twice, it will convert to a dash. This particular program that I'm using is a page layout software called Quark Express, and in this one, if I hold down, I'm on a Mac keyboard right now, so if I hold down Shift and Option and I type that hyphen, that same key next to the 0 on the top row of the keyboard, it'll type a dash. Okay, and there are M dashes and N dashes that are of different lengths. So an N dash is the width of the letter N, and an M dash is a little bit wider. It's the width of the letter M, as you might have figured out. Other style guides make a differentiation here. I believe maybe it's MLA or APA. They actually use M dashes and N dashes for different purposes. AP makes no distinction between them whatsoever. Just pick one and go with it. A dash is a dash as far as the Associated Press is concerned. So I'm not going to go into detail on use of hyphens. I'm going to do a whole video later on compound modifiers, compound adjectives, and that'll talk a lot about hyphens. We'll also probably talk about them in a video on prefixes and suffixes, but we'll leave that for another day. But I did want you to know the difference. Hyphens are joiners. Hyphens are used exclusively to join two words together for different reasons. Dashes are separators. Okay, you use dashes for a long pause in thought in a sentence. So an example of an abrupt break in thought would be the main point of this video, hey, that's a 0, not an O. There we go. The main point of this video, and this is critical, is that punctuation is important. Okay. In this case, the dashes are being used to signal an abrupt interruption or shift in thought in the sentence. So this dash shows sort of that it's an aside, it's a pause. This other dash shows we're going back to the main thought. You could just as easily use commas in this, but the dashes a lot of times help organize things a little bit better, help better show that it is sort of an aside, that is sort of a side thought in the sentence. Okay, let's talk about parentheses. Again, this would be the things that you type by using the Shift key above the 9 and 0. Okay, we don't use a lot of parentheses within the body of stories. Most of the time, if you have a parenthetical thought in a sentence in journalism and news writing, it just makes as much sense to set it off with commas as opposed to using parentheses, which sometimes is something you'll see done in more formal writing. So you're not going to see them used a whole lot. One key use of them would be to insert words that are into a quote that are there for clarification. So a lot of times if the person spoke and they used a pronoun and the reference isn't clear, you might say, let's say the original sentence was, he will attend the banquet on Tuesday. That's a terrible quote, but and obviously it would need some attribution here at the end, but let's say that for whatever reason, context of the story, you needed to make it clear that he's talking about the mayor. Okay, so maybe you could insert the words the mayor. Having trouble typing today. The mayor will attend the banquet on Thursday. Maybe you could do that if it made it clearer. This is something that you'll see. Now, you don't want to get carried away doing this in quotes, and more often than not when I see students doing it, it's often not necessary. Like it would be clear from the context of the story who he was. They'll just feel like they need to do this every time a pronoun is used in a quote, and it's often not necessary. But that is one use of parentheses that you'll see in news writing fairly often. Okay, question marks and exclamation points. These are pretty basic. Question marks, exclamation points, they obviously go at the ends of sentences, and here this is one where you need to think about whether these belong inside or outside the quotation marks if it's a quote. So it would make a difference depending on whether the quote was whether the stuff inside the quotation marks was the question. Okay, so have you read, pick a book, let's see, Gone with the Wind, and then we would put book titles in quotes. So this sentence, as punctuated, is incorrect because remember the full sentence here is a question. Can't have that period just hanging out there. So we put the question mark here. Why don't we put it inside the quotation marks? Well, because that's not a comma. That's not a question mark. Well, because the title isn't Gone with the Wind. Okay, that's not a question. The question mark does not belong to the book title, which would go in quotes. You know, you could have a really confusing example like, who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Maybe that should have an E on it. Don't have time to look it up now. Okay, technically, I guess that would be correct because the question mark is part of the title and the sentence is a question mark. Is this ever going to come up? I kind of doubt it. On exclamation points, you need to do the same analysis. Does it apply to the matter within the quotes or not? I would say this: don't get carried away with writing exclamation points. You shouldn't use them that often. People have a tendency to want to use them in a quote anytime somebody says anything mildly enthusiastic. I don't really think that's necessary. I think it makes your writing look amateurish. There's a whole episode of Seinfeld about this where Elaine breaks up with her boyfriend because he's an author and he didn't use an exclamation point when she wrote a note. And I believe the sentence was, I forget the name of the woman or some friend of hers, but it was, she had the baby. He wrote a note and he didn't use an exclamation point with it. He didn't think that was worthy of an exclamation point, so he didn't use it, and she got mad about it. As a news writer, here's my rule. You get 5 exclamation points per year. That's it. So you want to make them count. Only use them when it's really warranted. If you're putting an exclamation point inside somebody's quote, a direct quote from somebody you interviewed or somebody you overheard, they probably need to be shouting for that to count. Okay, so that's just wrapping up most of our miscellaneous punctuation. I'm going to add another quick video about semicolons, and we'll talk a little bit about using quotes with quotation marks with actual quotations.